everyone. Welcome to the Leap2College Interview series. We aim to bring perspectives from college students and graduates about their journey through high school and college. We hope that this will help high schoolers through their college application and decision process. Today, we are talking with Rachit Kataria. Thanks for joining us, Rachit. It's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
So to start off, can you begin by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sounds good. Hey, I'm Rachit, or Ratchet. I am currently actually working full-time as a software engineer at Facebook, but I'm basically a Bay Area native, kind of grew up over here, went to school in the area as well at Lynbrook, went to college at USC in LA, so not too far away as well, still in California. Had a good spread of experiences actually between different internships before I went full-time, again, into software engineering here. Actually, in high school, I was in pre-med, so there's some story there as well between different experiences back in high school, transitioning to CS, especially for full-time too. But yeah, good breadth of experiences, startups, bigger companies, generally pretty passionate about CS, all things tech. So yeah, excited to be here and happy to talk more about any of those things.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned a little bit about how you switched from pre-med to becoming a software engineer. So could you tell us a little bit more about it and what prompted the switch in career choice?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a hard time in general, just when you're in high school and you're kind of expected to make this decision of what your career supposedly hinges on. And you also have very little input at that point in time. Like, it's very hard to say, oh, I like biology and I like how, the generation of trees looks like, so I'm going to become a doctor. Like, that's a very, very miscorrelated thing to just be able to jump to. So I think, but that was the case. I think I really enjoyed bio. I love doing science fairs and just a lot of things that helped me understand more of the natural world, and even more on the pre-med side too, in terms of volunteering at the hospital. My junior year summer, I actually traveled to India and I shadowed a neurosurgeon, which was awesome because there's all this restrictions there. So I could literally scrub into a surgery and see exactly what's going on, which is really a once in a lifetime experience. But when it actually came time to decide, I was basically figuring out what was the right path. And while it all made sense in the moment for the 3 years of like, I can do pre-med, it's great, I love all these things. It's very different when you're actually finally deciding I have to do this or do this for the next 4 years, and it became a lot more real. And at that moment, I was kind of contemplating there's pre-med as an option, or bioengineering into pre-med, or computer science. And I'd taken APCS, I enjoyed it, it was fun. It was never really a consideration for long term, but I knew I could do well there. And so when I was making that decision, I basically decided like 80%, 20%, I'll apply to 80% of schools for college as pre-med, like bioengineering, and then maybe the other 20% with CS and just see what happens. And, I got my spread of schools. It kind of came down to, and there's a few different options, but it basically came down to Berkeley versus USC. And it's also kind of confusing at that point too. I was accepted to USC for CS, even though I had like basically no input on that for my high school activities, like nothing CS related. And Berkeley, I also got in for bioengineering. But if I had gone to either one, the plan would have been I go to USC and I switch to switch to pre-med because it's a lot more resources and easier to do over there, versus Berkeley where I could potentially switch into EECS and then do my CS over there. So that was kind of the consideration: USC pre-med, Berkeley CS. And the decision factor actually came down to realizing that one, I'd taken a Python course over the summer and I realized how exciting that was for me. And one of the things I realized about pre-med versus CS too is CS is you're constantly applying yourself in the moment. You can sit down and then sit up 2 hours later and have something brand new that didn't exist before. In this case, over the summer, I was literally going from nothing to making a really fun ping pong game in in Python that you could just play with friends, and it was a fun time. But that feeling of constantly applying logic and going from nothing to something was pretty gratifying. Whereas I think in a lot of pre-med, your focus is on consuming and then regurgitating without necessarily producing anything. And you can obviously get that in terms of research and a lot more practical application, but I felt like CS was just so much more about you have a baseline and you build on top of that, and you can forever use that baseline to do whatever you want, and that doesn't ever go away. So that felt pretty gratifying. So when I got to college, which ended up being USC, I decided, why not my first semester, no harm, let's just stick with CS for one semester, take my intro to BME and switch for intro to CS and see what happens. Worst case, I've lost one class, everything else is the same. And yeah, it was a fantastic semester. Like, I loved it. I did a lot of amazing things. I'm happy to talk more about that too. Amazing things that really made me feel like CS was the place to be. And yeah, the rest is history, clearly, as you can see. So pretty glad I made that decision.
Yeah. So like what cemented wanting to be in CS? I know you talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I mean, there's this consideration of the two. The one really big benefit for sure is that USC as a private school gave me that flexibility, whereas at a lot of other schools and public ones, for example, it's not as simple. Like, sure, Berkeley, maybe I could have switched from bioengineering to EECS, but you have to show like a semester or 2 semesters of certain GPA and have you done well in this or this to switch. USC, I showed up, and this is a week before school started. The next day, I walked into my counselor's office and I said, "Hey, can I switch from biomedical BME to CS?" And she literally just pulled up my transcript and deleted my major name and just typed in computer science. Like, that was literally it. And that 100% made it a lot easier to even entertain the possibility of switching it. So that was one thing. The second thing was that I also knew that it was one of those opportunities where in the worst case, I haven't lost that much time. And so I could just see what happens and just keep going from there. And I think the third thing was that I had a lot of really good resources in that first semester to just explore computer science. So I joined an entrepreneurship organization called Spark SC, which was probably the best decision I made in college. Amazing group of people. And at that time, actually, it was very heavily skewed towards CS in the population of students there. And so a majority of my peers were amazing coders, like really, really capable, knew what they were doing, great mentors to look up to. And actually, 3 of those people in Spark and I decided to form a hackathon group together and entered Hackasy, which is USC's premier hackathon. It was their first or second year doing it at that time. And we basically just learned Swift overnight to make an Apple TV application that connected with your phone. And it supported different touch gestures that could interact with the TV. You could hover over QR codes and like play a symphony of music. And Apple really liked it. They were actually there as a judge, and we basically won a few different prizes, but the notable one was the best OS X app, Apple like iOS or OS X app. And it wasn't this Apple Watch, but the one before was our prize. And for like all 4 years of college, I wore that as like my memento to getting into computer science, like always on my wrist. And that also translated to conversations leading to an internship. And so all of these little things coming together of getting into Spark, meeting an amazing group of mentors, winning my first hackathon, getting into conversations with a big company and like understanding what tech looks like over there. It definitely gave me a really good perspective on what CS could look like. And yeah, I kept following it.
It sounds really amazing. It seems like the chain of events that happened kind of just led you to this perfect position where you were set up very well for the future, which is really cool.
Hindsight, like one thing I definitely want to point out is in hindsight, and this will be the case throughout this entire talk, is that in hindsight, I can always spin a story for you, right? In hindsight, I can be like, this happened this year, this happened this year. They all chain together. In the moment, obviously, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm doing and hope things work out. But it is pretty interesting to be able to look back and realize how the things actually do connect and then kind of make a story around that. But basically, I want to preface it by saying when you are doing whatever you're doing, it's okay to not feel like where are the dots connecting, because usually things will pan out, but it's only till later that you can look back and see that.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that in the Bay Area, at least, a lot of the schools are really competitive. So compared to Lynbrook and other similarly competitive schools, what was like the culture and environment at USC like?
Yeah, good question. Lynbrook for sure, pretty competitive environment, as I'm sure a lot of people watching this know. And I think the great thing was it really prepped me really well. I think there's a certain philosophy towards approaching like these difficulties in education. And I think Lynbrook will prep you super well for college. And it's a question more of, are you going to go to a school that's not as rigorous, but then you struggle more in college? Or, you really have to struggle now and take that, get through it, and then be super well prepared for college. And, you can survive either way and like do a really good job and like adjust. But I think when you do get the prep that Lynbrook does give you in terms of a lot more workload, like all these extracurriculars and things that you just have to juggle and do well at, it really makes sure that you can do well in college. I think the main difference though is that, basically in Lynbrook, you're used to this day to day. Every single day, something is coming up, you have to deal with it, you have to do something. You have tests, you have clubs, and it's almost like every single day is a day by day, you just deal with it. Whereas in college, I think everything becomes almost based on your ability to time manage well. And this actually leans into a lot of your friend support as well, because what ends up happening is, you have all the classes that week and they all assign you an assignment, that Monday, and it's due a month later. And you're just given complete freedom in that month to do whatever you want to do. You could not do work for 3 weeks and then only work that last week. You could work every single day. And it's really up to you to figure out what works best for you. What is your order of priorities? And can you form a really good group of friends that can help you out throughout that entire process, where you can lean on each other to, form these study groups and just work in the same on the same projects together and really give that moral support. And that was great at USC. I think the CS community especially is one where, there's no grade deflation. There's no curbing of any kind, which means that if you're going to help someone out, it's because you want to, and you're all in this together. It's not like, if I help you out, I'm not going to do well, or something like that. And that really makes the environment one where if you do make good friends, and for example, literally 2 great friends of mine that I met in my freshman year, they're still my best friends till date, and I've had a class with them every single year of college, and we did pretty much everything together. And I can definitely attest to them and our study groups to doing as well as I have in college because of that.
That's definitely really cool. I think that a lot of high schoolers, me included, is a lot of procrastination, especially when there's like big projects and there's always like a test the next day or in a couple of days, and you're always worried about just the next thing that's going on, and you don't really have time to think long term. So what was the process of like switching from that environment in high school to like USC thinking more long term instead?
Yeah, it's definitely a big shift. It's something where at certain times you almost do take it day to day, because if you're doing prioritization well, exactly, like, this is almost like a muscle you build over time in college. You realize what assignments take how long, how fast are you at a certain type of work versus another type of work. And basically, in my month that I have, what of those projects should happen first versus later, week 1 versus week 2 versus week 3. And it's definitely an adjustment in the first year. It gets a lot better after that. But I think it just comes down to really sitting down and thinking about, like, literally list out what to do. One thing that worked super well for me, not even in terms of assignments, was just living by a calendar. So one of my mottos now is, if it's not on the calendar, it's not happening. And this could apply to hanging out with people. This could apply to events that are happening. This even applies to, I have an assignment that's due this day. And everything that comes up, as soon as I hear about it, it goes in the calendar. And that way, if you make a habit of just checking it, every 2 or 3 days, you know exactly where you stand and what's due. And you can adjust your priorities pretty quickly too. So that was a really good tip that I was able to take on, and just make sure I was always on top of what was coming up in my work week.
Yeah, that's definitely a really great strategy. And I think I've tried to enforce that on myself to make sure that I'm meeting my deadlines. So I think
Yeah.
if that gets drilled into people, I think it sets them up. So you touched a little bit on this already, but how did like your experience in Lynbrook and USC prepare you to do well at like, companies that you've interned or worked at, like Apple or Facebook?
Yeah. It's interesting because in college, a lot of what you're working on won't be what you're doing day to day in an internship. I think this will be the case across the board, no matter where you go for college. Because especially in computer science, I think you will definitely find that there's a high emphasis on, core algorithmic understanding, data structures, very essential components of computer science. And like those are very key to having a much better logical approach to what you're working on. But half the time, beyond that baseline, you're probably working on something in mobile development, maybe in ML, maybe in web dev, like server, that isn't very heavily focused on the algorithms per se, or on like, how do I write a map from scratch? You don't really have to worry about that. It's done for you. Your whole goal is implementing something, getting it to production, and getting people using it. And so I think the logical aspect of it is probably the most important part. Thinking on the spot, thinking, just being able to take a problem, whether it's in the space of CS, in the space of, math, whatever it may be, just approaching a problem and like having a really good mentality towards what step by step you need to take to solve it. Because whenever you go to any internship, like at Apple or Facebook, small company, big company, the tech stack will be different. The types of problems will be different. Your team will be different. The only constant is that you have to be able to logically solve a problem. And so I think a lot of what's like built into you as you go through, whether it's Lynbrook or USC's coding curriculum, is you're just given a lot of problems to solve, and how efficient and successful are you at doing that? And they're not going to match what you're doing in the industry, but those similar approaches will be pretty much exactly what you're doing on a day to day.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely something that I think we need to remember, that internships aren't going to be exactly like college or high school.
Yeah, yeah.
So I also noticed that you were a KPCB fellow in USC. So could you tell us a little bit about the fellowship and your experience?
Definitely. Yeah. Probably the best summer I've had. It was a really great experience. And the premise of KPCB, for those who aren't familiar, KPCB stands for Kleiner Perkins Caufield Byers. It is a really big VC firm up in SF and Palo Alto area. Super, super well known. The CEO, John Doerr, is an amazing investor. They've invested in companies like Uber, Airbnb, Slack, uh, Facebook at some point. Like they've definitely done a good job with investing, and they've picked the good companies. So KPCB's engineering fellowship program is a summer program where you apply and then they basically take a lot of applicants across the country, and then we'll choose a cohort of engineering fellows to work as an intern at one of their portfolio companies. And they also will couple that with basically just a very well curated program, like a fellowship program alongside it. So in context, in my personal experience, I was an intern at Shape Security, which was a pretty cool security company, cybersecurity company, where I was working on different techniques for basically assessing if you're a bot or a real user on a mobile device. So there's a bit of machine learning in there, some mobile telemetry data. So that was great on its own, just the internship, being at a small 200-person startup. But the other side was amazing as well, because they basically curate it where they know, you're interested in entrepreneurship, interested in understanding more about this founding mentality. So they set up these really great interviews where basically in a group of like 30 people, you could chat with John Doerr, the CEO of the entire company. You could chat with different CEOs of the various portfolio companies. So we talked with some from Nuna Health, for example, or from Slack. We were able to sit in on a one-on-one with him, talk with the VCs as well and get their perspective, different social events too. So it was just a really great kind of social experience that put you in this context of everyone really wanting to get into entrepreneurship and then giving you these resources and really valuable people to talk to get that perspective. So yeah, great summer. Met a lot of amazing people in there too.
That's definitely really interesting. So I know that you like interned or worked at several big companies like Apple and Facebook and several smaller ones. So have you noticed like a significant difference between like the environments in the two companies?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one big takeaway from all of this too, especially if you're interested in CS, is that the types of companies that you join, they will have a certain culture. You'll hear about like Facebook is super open and connected. Apple is a little more privacy driven. And you'll actually see that a lot of that does spill over into the work that you're doing. So I can give you a very clear example. When I was interning at Apple, I had my key card, my badge. It would only let me into my certain corridor of the building where I was doing work and my team existed. I couldn't get into other parts of the building because Apple's entire mentality is you're working on what you're working on. We want to maintain this element of surprise and delight. And that means even our employees shouldn't know what's going on behind the scenes. So you should just focus on what you're doing. That's it, and do it amazingly. And that works really well for basically isolating like these great types of work all over the place and then bringing it together in a really surprising manner. But at the same time, it takes away from you wanting to socialize with other people in the company or even knowing what's happening. And Facebook is almost the complete opposite, where they say make the world more open and connected, and it's very clear that they embody that in their workforce too. So me as an engineer today, I could download Instagram's code base or Oculus's code base or WhatsApp and do whatever I wanted to and put up a code change. And somebody has to approve it, obviously. But the fact that there's a transparency to the extent that I can just know what's happening across the entire company, it really goes to show that they value any engineer's input no matter what you're working on, where you're working on it. And that also spills into the company culture where people are really receptive to you just reaching out. So I can hit up a manager, a director. Normally, most of the time, they'll make the time out of their day to hop on a call, meet up in person. And that type of culture is just more what I wanted to lean towards because I'm also a little more social. I love talking to people too. And I think that fit just worked a lot better because of those differences in culture.
It's definitely really interesting. I think that with someone who without industry experience hasn't really seen insight into these things. So getting your perspective is definitely really great.
Yeah.
So I also noticed that you were a recipient of the Trustee Scholarship at USC. So can you tell us a little bit about what getting that scholarship was like and if the experience in college differed because of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I was very fortunate to have been the recipient of a Trustee Scholarship. For context, that is a full tuition scholarship, which was amazing, especially for my parents because it helped them a lot with the financials. But yeah, it was so UC is interesting because you basically just apply before a certain deadline. basically before December when you're doing your senior apps, and you're automatically considered for a scholarship application. At which point, if they like your resume, they'll invite you over for an on-site interview, and then they'll ask you questions in a panel. Basically, it'll be a professor there, there'll be somebody who is maybe a graduate student, and then an undergrad who's just assessing you for different types of things. They'll ask questions about what you're interested about, what do you hope to contribute at this college, what is kind of your roadmap for like the next 4 years. And yeah, funnily enough, I, I came in talking about this as if I was going to be a computer science student, right? Even though I switched to biomedical and then again switched back to computer science. So it's this really weird, like, it ended up working out well because I think it was actually very holistic. They're wondering about more as me as a person versus, what are you going to do in CS? What are you going to do in bio? They didn't really care about that as much. And I think that's something that definitely, it's a really good trait of the school because it also shows you that, they'll change your major. They're invested in you, not the major that you're entering. And so that was really great. I think in terms of your second part of the question, how that affected the experience, I would say, I think USC is one of the few schools where if you do come in as a scholarship student, they'll actually put you in different scholarship housing where all the other scholarship students are there. And it kind of sounds like this elitist, like this is your college dorm, this is the other ones. And to a certain extent, there's pros and cons to the experience. But for me, what made it awesome was just knowing that everyone who was here was super, super driven. And all the people that I met were amazing, like very academically capable, super great conversations with them, and also very social, interestingly. I think the entire experience, especially as a freshman, everyone was surprisingly very social. And because I was in this dorm setup, those two people I talked to you about, my best friends over the 4 years, I met on the same floor in my dorm. And it was just that kind of camaraderie and like that feeling that, we're in this together and we're all like super academically motivated to just push each other to do pretty great things, I think, all around the board. And so I think if it hadn't been for that freshman year and that specific floor of just bonding, it would have definitely changed the friends I made and the people I interacted with. So it definitely influenced the first year and the years after.
So also, like, I know that in high school, a lot of kids are worried about, getting into college and how do I make my application seem as good as possible, especially in Lynbrook and other competitive schools.
Right.
So what would you recommend that high schoolers do and not do to make their application stronger?
Yeah, it's definitely a stressful time. I've been there. I definitely know what you're talking about. I think the thing you shouldn't do is treat everything you're working on as something to put on the resume. A lot of people can fall into that trap of like, I want to do this because I want this to show on my resume and I want this to be like something that colleges look at. And I even fell in that trap. Definitely, I am culpable of that, having tried to approach things that way too. And the issue with that is like, maybe you start getting this like widespread list of experiences. Like, I'm a officer in this position. I'm a volunteer here. I'm this, and this over here. The problem with that is you don't actually have a very cohesive story to tell college people. Sure, they can see like you're a leader, you're in this position, you're interested in sciences, you've done this before. But if there's no actual story of like you're passionate enough about something that everything that you do is centered around this, because that only shines when you actually feel that passion, then you go do it versus trying to spread yourself thin across all the things you think what a college expects of you are like on your resume. And so the more you can get out of that mentality, I think, and actually get into one where if you're really passionate about it, like everything that you do centers around this and you personally have that story you can tell, it'll just show much clearer, I think. So the more, it's kind of vague because it definitely applies per person. I think it's hard to say like per person, what are your passions and what are your interests there? That's for you to know. But when you do find that, I think the more you can tailor what you do around that and have a very clear story of why you're doing what you're doing, not just from a story that you're trying to spin, but from one that you like genuinely feel is guiding what you do, I think that makes it a lot stronger. And I think college people will see that. Whoever's reviewing your essays, they'll definitely see that much more than someone who is kind of just generally doing things for the sake of doing them because it checks off the leadership box or the STEM box or whatever. So yeah, the more you can think about that, I think it would help. Yeah.
So like from your high school and college experience, what's like one piece of advice that you give to current high schoolers? Like, what should they be worrying about when they're approaching college and college applications?
Yeah, definitely. Probably a good piece of advice I would say that has helped me a lot is just it's kind of realizing that you shouldn't feel like you're stuck in what you've done so far. Like it's never too late to change what you've been working on, because this will impact your life, right? Like my personal example was pre-med, where 4 years, you might consider like I've invested 4 years of my life doing science fairs, doing science bowls, doing like XYZ related to STEM, right? Even all your summers are dictated by that interest. And then realizing that maybe, it's been 4 years, but this might not be the right thing, right? Maybe there's something else that could be a little more interesting that's worth exploring. And I think it's very easy to get caught up, especially with the pressure of your parents and your peers, to feel like I need to go into pre-med, I need to go into CS, I need to do everything that I do geared towards this end goal, because I have to build this like image of myself as someone good at that. Like, yes, that's important, but end of the day, even when you finish high school and get into college, there shouldn't be an expectation that you know what you want to do. And like throughout college, I know many friends, even myself included, right? I came in BME, I switched to CCS, I switched to CS. There's no requirement that you come in knowing exactly what you want to do. And you'll have even less signal of that in high school. You'll get a little bit more in college with the freedoms that you have. But end of the day, if you feel like something isn't going right and you see something that might look better that you're interested in, you shouldn't be afraid to just say, hey, I want to try it, take the risk and just see what happens. And as someone who's done that and has like experienced taking that potential option or taking some route and seeing what works or not, it worked for me. And I'm really glad that I took the chance to just switch up my first semester and see what would happen. So I would encourage anyone who's in a similar situation of like feeling like they want to try something else to don't shy away from it. Just go for it.
In general, what has been like your biggest takeaway from like high school, college, or industry experience? Like what have you learned along the way?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely shared a few of the snippets already. I think some of those have stuck with me forever. If it's not on the cal, it's not happening. Don't be afraid to try new things, and just don't shy away if you really feel like that's an opportunity you want to take. Leaning on your friends is probably the biggest one in college. There's definitely many times where if I hadn't leaned on my friends in that sense of like just knowing that we were there for each other to do problems together, like help each other out, it would have made classes substantially harder. And I think just making that really good group to lean on over the course of the 4 years it will pay so many dividends down the line, not in terms of friendship, not even just in terms of friendship, but just your ability to feel confident like what you're doing and knowing you have a support system if you need it. I think, yeah, those are really key ones for me. In terms of industry, I would say it's really about how fast you can just pick up things on the spot, like on the fly, because so much of what you are doing is very, very new. It'll always be different wherever you go. Each company has its own software stack or different types of internal tools they're using. So you coming in as an engineer, I think the best way to approach it is you're pretty much just a problem solver. Like you're a fixer. You show up, you see what's wrong, and you have the ability to just ramp up quickly, ask the right questions, be willing to communicate with people, and then understand what needs to get done. And that'll literally apply anywhere you go. Whatever industry you're in, whatever problems you're solving, if you can kind of take that mentality of just being super willing to say, I don't know what this is. I'm really, my expertise is somewhere else, and there's this new thing coming up. I'm still going to be the person who's willing to jump in, pick things up quickly, and solve the problem. Because at that point, you become valuable no matter what you're doing. It's not like you're this specific person. I only do this, or I only do this. And again, this applies anywhere you're doing, like helping friends out with a problem. You're like willing to just listen to something new and figure out if you can give some advice. Figuring out a new problem at school, like it literally could apply to anything. So if there is any guiding thread for how I've tried to approach any issues that come up, whether it's in school, whether it's in college, whether it's in industry, it's just being really open and communicative as much as I can. So when the time comes that I do have to figure something out or have to solve it or like work together with people, you can really push yourself to be up for that challenge, and people really respect that too. I think you end up making a lot more connections that way, and you end up being you just feel a lot more proud of like the problems you can solve being that type of person. I by no means master that whatsoever. It's like something I keep striving to be better at myself, but it's definitely been something that has helped me along the way.
Okay, great. So thanks so much for the incredible advice and for taking the time to share your story. That's pretty much all we have for today. So if you have any final words, you can go ahead. But other than that, I think we're good to go.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for being a great host. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, it's for everyone who's listening. Uh, yeah, just seize the opportunities that you have. Don't feel shy about switching things up if you want to. At the end of the day, I've given this analogy before, but like you can almost try to always look for the optimal path in your life and say like I'm at A, I want to be going to B, and like try to find this perfect line. Which you only really see in hindsight, and you like form this story for yourself, like, oh, it all worked out at the end. But in the moment, it's just you trying to figure things out and doing the best that you can, and everything works out. So, don't take too much stress. Just do the best you can, enjoy what you're doing, and everything should fall in place.
Great, thank you.
Cool, thanks.